Hey guys, it's Courtney. Today we're going to be making another card with the old-fashioned Christmas stamp set by Gina K Designs. Made a card about a week ago with one image from the stamp set. I'm going to be using the car this time. So I have a piece of Neenah Solar White 80-pound cardstock. This is cut down to 4 by 5 1/4. Stamping my image right there in the center towards the bottom with blackout ink by Ink on 3. And I'm going to be creating a scene, of course, but I am going to try to channel my inner Sandy Alnock and do this freehand. So I've never actually done this before. No ruler today, so I'm gonna kind of wing it. So I'm taking my C1, which is a pretty light color, and I'm kind of just mapping out my areas here. So where my sky will start, and I knew I wanted to put a moon in the background. Didn't get a very good circle there, so I took my colorless blender and kind of fixed up some of that area where it was kind of a wonky looking circle. So for the moon itself, I'm going to be coloring this with warm gray markers, my W3 and my W1. So I'm taking my W3 and kind of just going over that line that we had created with the C1. And then I'm just going to add a little bit of texture towards the right and to the left with just little dots. And then I'm going to go over the entire thing with my W1. Now this is going to look super dark for a moon, but once we get everything else colored, it will appear to be a lot lighter than everything else. So for my sky, I'm going to be using all B90 markers. So I'm starting off with the lightest B91, and I'm going around the moon, but I'm leaving a little bit of a white area around it, just because I had a feeling that my markers were going to bleed a little bit because I knew I was going to have to add a whole lot of color down. So I'm going to cover up my entire sky with the B91 just to kind of get my paper saturated. This will allow your colors to blend a little bit easier. Then I was going to go right in with my darkest color, but then decided that's probably not the best idea in this case. So I'm going to go in with my B93 and leaving a little bit of that B91 down, just kind of mapping out where I'm going to want the B93. It's going to look a little crazy because the colors aren't going to blend immediately. Doing the same thing with the B95, going around that B93, and then going to the B97, doing that same thing. So I'm just doing like semicircles around my moon. Eventually it will look more like a gradient. I didn't get the best blend in the world, but it looks a lot better than it does right now. So now I'm going to go in reverse, going back down to the B95, then the B93, and then the B91. And I'm going to have this sped up a lot because this took me a little bit of time just to make sure I got everything blended. Once those colors were fairly blended, I'll go back with my B99 and I'm going right around my car. You can mask this out, but honestly, no matter what masking paper you use, if you use a whole lot of Copic ink, it's going to seep through anyway. So bring that B99 right up to my little semicircle there, and I'm just doing half of the card at a time. I just found that to be a little bit easier. Then I'm going to go in reverse with those colors again and make sure that they're all blended along with that B99. I did go over the B99 area more than once just so that I didn't get those streaky lines that you sometimes get from alcohol markers. And like I said, just go in reverse to make sure all of those colors blend. Next, we'll move on to the snow. So again, starting off with that C1 and kind of just mapping out where my little road will be. And I wanted this to, it's gonna look smaller the further back it gets. So it's the widest up front. And again, just using my colorless blender for any areas that I may have messed up a little bit. But I'm gonna use my C markers anyway, so I guess that really didn't matter. Now I didn't have a plan. I didn't have a plan at all, but I did want to make sure that the road appeared to be a little bit lower than the rest of the snow on either side. So I'm just doing some flicking motions with my C1 out towards the rest of the snow and just putting some streaky lines where the road is just to kind of give that some texture. Again, I'll speed this up a little bit. Gonna go in with my B91 just to bring a little bit of blue into this. And this will blend nicely with the C1, especially being those last numbers are the same. And then I will continue with my C markers just to kind of get a little bit more texture, I guess, or more contrast. It was too white. Being it's a night scene, the snow would appear to be darker. Gonna go in with that same C3 on either side, bringing some shadows in on either side because that's will be the darkest, or my light source is obviously in the center from that moon. Gonna kind of go back and forth here just to kind of, until I was happy with it. Like I said, had no plan, had no idea what I was doing. I've never tried this before, but I figured if I mess up, it's only paper. So next, I still wasn't getting enough contrast. So I decided to go in with the C5 from either side and the B93. Then blending that out with the C3, then the B91, and then finally back to the C1. And I was having a hard time blending. I found that I was getting that harsh line right there. So I moved on to the other side just to kind of let my ink dry a little bit. Even though it's alcohol ink, with the amount that I'm laying down here, it's still wet. So I decided to let that dry and see if that evened itself out a little bit. And I'm doing the same exact thing to the other side, bringing in that C5 and that B93, then the C3, B91, and then the C1. And I was still getting that harsh line. So I ended up going back over it again with longer flicking motions, I guess, with more of the side of the nib of the marker. And I was finding that that was blending out a little bit easier. I'm going to bring in a little bit more of that B91 and trying to get rid of that harsh line there. And it worked. It's still not perfect, but like I said, it's the first time I've tried it, so I'm happy with the results. Next, going to add a shadow in front of the car with my C markers. Going to start off with my lightest, work my way up to the darkest, and then back to my lightest for this one, just to make sure that I had my shadows in the correct area. Once I do get down to that C1, I'm pretty much going to cover up all of the snow with this. Not being too careful to get a perfect blend because I still want to have some of that texture, and I don't want to get rid of that shadow either. Next, we are going to add some trees, and this is where I began messing up. So I'm going in with a YG95, which is usually a dark color, but when I'm coloring right over that blue, it's fairly light, which I'm glad that I started off with a lighter color just to kind of map out everything. I'm going to go over it with some darker colors in a minute, but I'm just doing little squiggly lines starting with the tip of the tree and kind of working my way down. Now, I wasn't thinking that I was going beyond the skyline, or I guess you would call it, and it looked really funny no matter what color I used. Moved on to the YG97, trying to get a little bit, well, obviously I wanted to make the trees a little bit darker, but I also wanted to make it not so noticeable of where that skyline was. Next, I'll go on to the YG99, which is extremely dark. I think it's the darkest green that I have, and it still didn't completely cover it up. But I'm just basically letting my marker skip, working back and forth in like a zigzag motion, kind of going up and down, just little squiggly lines. And I'm letting my marker skip, so I'm barely touching the paper. And this will kind of give the trees a little bit of texture. They don't have to be perfect. They're just in the background anyway. But like I said, I wish I would have either went right on the sky, or maybe, I don't know. I don't know what I should have done different, but I shouldn't have done what I did. So once I had the YG99 down, I ended up bringing a BG99, I think it was. And I thought maybe that would bring in a little bit more darkness to kind of get rid of that harsh line that you can see through the trees. Still didn't work, but it is what it is. Like I said, it's just paper. First time I tried it, and I'll learn from my mistakes. So once I had the entire background done, we're going to go ahead and move on to the coloring of the car itself. Again, I'm going to speed this up a little bit faster than I normally do my coloring, just because this video would have been like an hour long. So I'm going to start off with my snow, and I'm just going to be creating some shadows with the C3 pretty much on the bottom. You can see the lines within the image. You can kind of see that the snow is kind of piled up on top of the car. So I'm just using those lines as my guide as to where I should be putting my shadows. Then I'll just use some light flicking motions to blend that out with the C1. Now there's a lot going on in this image, so you'll see me kind of go back and forth from one image and realize that I missed a spot of something, like this snow on the bumper here. Didn't even see it the first time, but coloring it the same way. So you'll see me kind of go back and forth. For the car itself, I wanted to make this car red, so I'm going to go to my go-to red combination, starting off with my lightest color and mapping out my darkest areas. Being we have a center light source here, my darkest areas will be on either side, and then pretty much under everything. So under the little headlights, underneath the pile of snow, underneath the little wreath there would cast a shadow. Next, going in with my darkest color, just going over those same areas that we had mapped out with the lightest color, going in with a really light hand here because I want to make sure that I don't put on too much ink, because I don't want it to bleed. Red is very difficult to get rid of. Most of the time you can't use a colorless blender to get rid of it. So I would have to use a white gel pen, which would then take away my color that I have in my background. And I did my background first because I didn't know what I was doing. So like I said, it's just paper. So I didn't want to waste my time coloring the image if I wasn't able to do the background the way I had envisioned. So moving on to the lightest midtone, or the darkest midtone, then the lightest midtone, just kind of extending those areas out a little bit. And there's not going to be too much of a highlight color left, or highlight area left, but I'll just fill in those small little areas with that R22. Next, for the tires, I want these obviously to appear to be black. So I'm going to start off right with the black marker and just add some shading to the top where it's underneath the rest of the car, and to the bottom of the tires. Blend those flicks out a little bit with the C7, and then the highlight will be the C5. While I have the C markers out, I'm going to go ahead and color everything that I believe is supposed to be metal on the car. So the bumper and the grille and the little frame of the headlight there. Some of the areas that are really teeny tiny, I'm not doing any shading. I'm just going in solid with the C5. And other areas like the bumper and the grille, I am doing just a little bit of shading to give it some dimension. For the bumper, it was blending in too much with my snow, so I ended up bringing in my C7 as my darkest color, blending that out with the C5 and then the C3 just to kind of differentiate that from the rest of the snow, which we all also obviously colored with the C markers as well. Going to do the same thing for this little rear view mirror, using the C7, C5, and C3 for that as well. For the little headlights, I went in with just any Y marker and colored those in solid. Wasn't worried about doing any shading for those at all. For the little wreath that's hanging on top or in front of the car, I'm going to go in with two different greens here, and I'm going to go right in with my darkest color. I'm not worried about what's a leaf and what's a berry. I'm just kind of laying down some color there. So I have two different color greens, not worried about blending them. Nobody's going to know the difference. If I can't tell the difference, nobody else can either. I just wanted to have some kind of variation in color. For the little berries, I'm just putting a dot down. So I'm not doing any kind of shading for those at all, just putting a dot kind of wherever I wanted to. I didn't get a great impression when I stamped, and that's totally my fault. I should have probably used my Misty, being it's a larger image, but it is what it is. So I added my berries wherever I felt like they needed to be. So next we're going to go on to the presents and going to be coloring these pretty much 3 different colors, the greens, the reds, and like a golden yellow. So for the shading on these, it's going to, for the bottom ones, it's going to be, well, for all of them really, the shading is going to be to the bottom part of the box, either where it's kind of showing underneath the one below it or underneath the little pile of snow that's on top of the car. And I'm only doing 3 color blends for all of these. There would also be some shading on either side of the little boxes as well. For the boxes that are kind of turned to the side where the corner's kind of sticking out, I'm making sure that I leave a highlight there, being this area would be sticking out further than the rest of the box. This would be where your highlight would be naturally. I'm coloring directly over the ribbons because I figured I can just fill those in later, especially for this larger ribbon here. I am coloring the box like that golden yellow so that it would be easy to color directly over it with my red color for the little ribbon. And I'm not doing any shading for the ribbon at all. Areas like this, you don't have to worry about any kind of shading. Nobody's going to see it or notice that you didn't shade it. So I'm going to use those same Y markers that I use for some of those gifts for the license plate. Oh, I also added a little bit of shading to the windshield with that C3 and C1. Being this is clear, you would see the snow behind it. Using those same Y markers for the little license plate. And then we're going to add some details with the white gel pen. So I'm just going to add some lines basically underneath the little tires and then smear it out with my finger. Now I smeared up, but I meant to smear to the side for that one. So once the gel pen is completely dry, which does take a few minutes to dry, I'll go back in with the, I don't even know which one I use. I think a C7 to go over it. You're not going to completely cover it, but I'll just add that color back in. I'm also going to go in for this ribbon. I forgot about this ribbon as well. But you'll want to make sure that that gel pen is completely dry before you do that. Then I'll go back in with that gel pen again just to add that texture within the snow that the tires would be creating as it's going over the snow. So once all of my coloring was complete, we're going to add some snow to the background with that same white gel pen. And again, got this from Sandy Allnock. I usually put snow in my sky, but if it is snowing, it would be snowing over everything. So I covered up the entire panel with just little dots with my white gel pen. No, I didn't leave any room for my sentiment on my card panel itself. So I'm taking one of the sentiments from that same stamp set, and I'm going to be stamping with VersaFine Onyx Black ink, and I'm going to stamp in the inside of my card. Now I put this aside to dry for a few minutes. It is a pigment ink. Dries fairly quickly, but still takes a minute or two, so I didn't want to smear that. Somebody's beeping outside, so I'm sorry if you can hear that. So I'm going to adhere my fun foam to the back of my panel with my Tombow Mono Multi Glue, and then use that same glue to adhere the card panel onto my card base itself, and just leaving a little bit of a white border around my little scene there. I put this under my Misty just to dry to make sure that it dries flat, because the glue takes a little bit of time to dry when it's on the fun foam. But that is the card for today, guys. Thanks a lot for stopping by. Have a great day. Bye.